Perfect. Yeah, pleasure to be here, and very cool to see that so many people in Israel are excited about regenerative agriculture. So very much looking forward to engaging in some conversations later on, and to be hearing how the movement has been starting here. There's two disclaimers that I kind of want to make before I take you through our theory of change from climate farmers. The first one being, everything that I'm saying is learnings that we made from the European context. So over the last 3 years, I had the pleasure of transitioning and supporting several hundred farmers in the European Union with that transition towards regenerative agriculture. And from those transitions and from those learnings and experiences, we distilled a lot of knowledge on what needs to happen in Europe. But as most of you probably know, regenerative agriculture is highly context specific, right? So there might be some of the things that you can be learning from for Israel. There might be some of the things that are not applicable here. So please just always, with everything that I'm saying, be mindful of the fact it's coming from the European context. The second disclaimer that I have to make is, unfortunately right now, I'm not an active farmer myself. I'm an aspiring farmer, I would say. And I personally started my journey towards regenerative agriculture back in 2017, when me and some friends wanted to build up a community in Portugal, as so many people nowadays want to do. Also lots of Israelis, by the way, getting into that in Portugal at the moment. And we bought a bunch of broken down houses, and we also bought some land, and we currently have around 200 dunam of land. And my idea would be to also be practicing regenerative agriculture there myself. In the meantime, while diving into the topic, I discovered a few things that then set me to start climate farmers, and that prevented me from farming. So with these disclaimers being said, let's get into it. The first thing that was amazing me when I got into agriculture back in 2017 was the fact that it's one of the main reasons why climate change is happening right now. You might have heard already 24% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture, and it's one of the main drivers for crossing several of the planetary boundaries that we're having at the moment. This lasts from biodiversity loss over the climate crisis in general, to also, for example, the nitrogen cycle, which is heavily disturbed due to the agricultural practices which we are doing. At the same time, what I found amazing is we do know a solution to all of this. And as many of you in this room probably know, regenerative agriculture is a potential solution. Regenerative agriculture builds biodiversity, it helps with the biodiversity loss, it also helps with the massive economic crisis that we have of farmers. In the European Union, for example, 60 to 80% of the income of farmers is coming from subsidies. That's a number to let sink in. 60 to 80% of your income is basically coming from subsidies, which means farming in itself is not profitable. And that is not how it should be. Farming should be a profitable business in itself, and regenerative agriculture opens the door to make that happen again. And we also have the rising fertilizer costs, which you probably felt here as well. We had about 800% increase in Europe in that. That's like a MacBook suddenly costing 25,000 euros, and also substantially helps with, or supports the financial crisis of farmers. We do know already from several studies that have been conducted that regenerative agriculture builds biodiversity. We also know already that it captures carbon, and we also know already that it helps with erosion. The problem that we're having is, it's not scaling. So for some reason, we found scientific papers from the 80s and 90s already, which have been speaking about all these amazing benefits of regenerative agriculture, but it's just not happening. And this was the thing that was flabbergasting me back then. So I had the luxury already at that point that I could be working remotely. So I spent 1 year visiting farmers. I was first trying to find regenerative farmers in Europe, which was a pretty hard job back then. I found around 60 of them between Germany and Portugal, and I visited these farmers, and I spoke with these farmers about what they think needs to happen to scale regenerative agriculture, how they got into it, and what we could do to help them. And based on these conversations with the farmers, me and my co-founder Ivo, who know each other through a social entrepreneurship community, we decided to embark and to start Climate Farmers in order to support farmers in that transition. And what we realized is one of the biggest issues that we're having is when you're trying to start something new, you need models. Farmers are not impressed by PowerPoint presentations. Farmers want to see what's happening in the soil. They want to see what's going on a farm. And what the problem is, if you're starting with this in the beginning, there are no model farms to go to. So what we are working on with Climate Farmers is to scale regenerative agriculture in Europe. And there's two main premises that we're working on. The one is, we just need to get to 10% of all European farmland to be under regenerative management, and then the other 90% are going to be easy. Because as soon as we have these 10%, we will have farms in almost every context in Europe where other farmers can go and they can see what's happening. And we have already done a few of these farm visits, and it's something beautiful to see when you see farmers going in a regenerative farm and seeing the soil health and seeing grass in southern Portugal being green in summer, something that has been unheard of before. And once you see that spark in the eyes, then usually the journey towards regenerative agriculture is an easy one to pitch. But what we need to start happening is to get to these model farms. So that's what we are working on at the moment. And the second thing is, it needs to make economical sense for farmers to do regenerative agriculture. Because if it's not making sense economically, then the reason is not there to do it so, because every farm in the end is a business, and businesses need to run in a profitable manner. So how do we get there? We have two main issues: knowledge and finance. On the first one, the issue that we're having is that in the European Union, farmers at the past 50 years have only been paid for yield. So all that mattered is, how much are you producing on your farm? It did not matter what are the side effects of it. Are you building up biodiversity? Are you capturing carbon? Are you storing water in your soil? Well, all questions that were not asked and that were not paid for by society. So what we're having is a focus on yield, and we need to shift that mindset and that focus on yield to a focus on building up soil health. Because if you're building up soil health, then all the other things will come as side benefits of it. So this is a main area which we're tackling at the moment, that we're helping farmers to figure out how regenerative agriculture can work in their context and how they can shift their focus on building up soil health. More on that a little bit later on. And the other one that we're having is financing instruments. So what we mean here is we're measuring regeneration that's taking place on farms. So for example, increase in biodiversity or increase in soil carbon, and then we need to pay for it as society. I would love for this to be with subsidies. At the moment, the main way that we have found for this is private companies which are doing compensation through carbon emissions from regenerative agriculture. More on that one later on as well. So we've run several projects with our farmers. We have had a lot of conversations with the farming community, and based on the experiments that we've been doing mostly in 2021, we are currently having 5 main projects which we are running and which we see as being valuable in order to scale regenerative agriculture. And hopefully, maybe some of these projects can also be implemented here in Israel and could be fitting for your context and your community here as well. So one of them is a farm enterprise analysis. So we're sitting down with the farmer and we're looking at what's going good on your farm, what's not going good on your farm, what is profitable, what are the effects of climate change on your farm, and what would be if you would be transitioning parts of your farm towards regenerative agriculture. How would that affect your farm economics? And how can we support you in that one? So first step, take a look what's actually going on. Second step, and this is a very interesting one, provide a community. As far as I know, many of you are farmers as well, and I don't know how the situation is here, but in Europe, we have a massive problem with appreciation for farmers. Farmers are not getting the respect that they should in society, and as a result of that, young people are not getting into farming. In very short, farming is not sexy. And because farming is not sexy, a lot of farms are dying out in my generation. The average age of farmers in the European Union is 58 years. This is 5 to 10 years before your retirement. And now imagine someone is coming to your farm and is telling you that you are 58 years old, what you've been doing for the last 30 years is actually not that good. You should be changing your practices and you should be doing anything new. That's not a very great conversation to have. And that's not happening. So a main thing that what we're doing right now is we're on the one hand doing storytelling to show that regenerative farmers are the heroes of our times because they're cleaning up our ecosystem and that young people should get into farming, and then we're providing a community for them. So what you're seeing here is from snapshots from a WhatsApp group which we have been running in summer 2021 with Richard Perkins, one of the leading regenerative farmers in Europe, where we brought farmers from different countries together to support each other on their journey. And what came out of that was beautiful. There was a lot of sharing going on about the struggles of being a farmer, the beauties of being a farmer, and pictures, and that group is still alive today. So one thing that we realized when we started, we wanted to build a community on Slack, and we wanted a community on Mighty Gathering, and on all these fancy platforms, it doesn't work. What we're doing now is WhatsApp. In Europe, every farmer has WhatsApp, so we have regional and cross-regional WhatsApp communities which are managed by farmers in order to support each other on the journey with the struggles that are happening, and also just with the uplifting word, because many of these farmers, they are alone, they're the only regenerative farmers in the area, and they need a support network around them. And that support network has proven to be wondrous. Very low-cost solution, not a great business model, but definitely one that can have a lot of impact on the lives of regenerative farmers on that path. Another one, consultants. You might have heard about the whole situation of regenerative agriculture being a little bit hyped in the last 3 years. Suddenly, everybody's speaking about it, right? Monsanto is talking about regenerative agriculture. Nestle is talking about regenerative agriculture. Kiss the Ground came out on Netflix. Very nice documentary if you haven't seen it. Bit American for my taste, but they got Woody Harrelson as the narrator. And it shows the story with very nice pictures. Definitely helped with making Region Ag mainstream. Which is great. It's great that we're talking about it. It also has the issue, though, that suddenly everybody claims to be a regenerative agriculture expert, even though most of them are not. So what do we see? We got reports from farmers that were telling us that they got an expert which they found online, they used Google obviously, and then they figured out that guy or girl doesn't actually know what they're talking about. So what we started setting up is a farmer-backed consultant agency. We have 150 consultants in the European Union with which we're working. All of these consultants are verified and recommended by farmers to us. And if a farmer wants to do a consultation through us, he can talk to the other farmers that the consultant worked with already. Because farmers trust other farmers, as they should, because everybody else doesn't really know what they're talking about. And that's what we're building up at the moment, and this is another thing which I would highly recommend to set up in Israel, to really start figuring out who knows what they're talking about, and who just claims to know what they're talking about, because there's way too many people of the second category in our experience in the European context. The other thing, transition blueprint process. As we said, regenerative agriculture, highly context specific. You cannot make a one-size-fits-all solution. You probably all heard about the 5 principles, and they're all great, but they don't really help a farmer to figure out what a transition should look like in their context. So what we're doing is, we're seeing, what is your personal context? Who do you want to take over your farm? What would you like to do? Would you be interested in having animals, for example, incorporated? What is your farm business context, as touched upon before? What is working financially, what not? What is also your ecological context? What is your soil health? What is your climate region? And then, together with all of this and a consultant, we create an implementation plan. Then with that implementation plan, we invite them into a peer group so they can talk with other farmers to see what's going on and how the struggles are on the regenerative path. And then we collect data on what's actually happening, what regeneration is taking place, and what works in what context and what doesn't. From this, we're using MRV. We have a whole tech component in the company as well, because as we heard in the very beginning, measuring regeneration is one of the key components that we need in order to start paying farmers for the ecosystem services, which they're providing for all of us, and which we should be paying for as a society. And for that, we are on the one hand having a partnership with Wageningen University, which is one of the leading agricultural universities in Europe, and I'm sure you have great agricultural universities here in Israel as well, because they have a lot of data sets, and together with these data sets from them, and satellite imagery and data that we're getting from the farmers, we can measure and see what's going on the farms, and we can give recommendations to the farmers on what's working, what's not working, and what can be done in order to further improve their soil health. And then, and this is the thing that we're doing at the moment in order to start paying farmers for these ecosystem services, is regeneration credits. So essentially, you probably all heard about this. There is a big hype around carbon in the whole regenerative agriculture industry. I'm not a big fan of that hype around carbon. I think there's so many benefits around regenerative agriculture, nutrient density probably being my favorite one from them, biodiversity increase being another one I love, but also it increases carbon. And with climate change being more and more of an issue, and luckily more and more people realizing that it is an issue, companies are suddenly willing to pay for storage of carbon in the soil. So what we're doing is we're selling these carbon plus credits on the voluntary carbon market, and we're matching companies on the local level with farmers. So they essentially adopt the farmer, they support that farmer on a 10-year journey towards regeneration, and they're supporting him by paying him for storing carbon in the soil, and in the best case scenario, also sourcing produce from those farmers, which is a very interesting one that we're seeing a lot in Europe happening. Companies are interested in getting regenerative produce and collecting data on it and giving them the indicators of regeneration are helping in driving that forward. And that's essentially already it. This is all that we are doing at the moment, and we're always looking for collaborations. We're always happy to talk, and very curious to have a bit of a discussion on hearing what's going on in Israel and any questions that you might be having. Thanks.
Yes? Okay. Thank you, Philippe. That was great. We do have time for questions from the crowd. Any type of questions, because Philippe represents a lot of different kind of sides. So, any questions? If someone wants, there is a mic there and a mic there. Arik.
Thank you. will be your recommendation for 3 to 4 practices to adopt in the transition for a farmer that want to move towards regeneration?
What would be the recommendation of practices?
Yeah.
I would not give a recommendation for practices. So this is what I was saying with regenerative agriculture being highly context specific. In the end, I do not know what the context of a specific farmer is. So it really comes down to the context which you're in to see what makes sense. So it's always, that's what I was trying to point out, it's always about an analysis of what's the context that the farmer is in, what's the rainfall that you're having, what's the soil that you're having, what's the demand for produce that's going on in your area, and from that we can then see what would make sense in that context. In general, I'm always a big fan of a large level of biodiversity. For example, I can give one example. For example, that we had was a farmer in southern Portugal that has 700 hectares of land and that had already a cattle operation going on, but he had it in a relatively traditional way. So what we have been doing is we have been helping him with creating a holistic grazing plan, which is essentially using animals which are in line with how they would be working in nature. So for cows, this means, for example, they would be grazing one day in one area, then they would be moving on to the next area the next day, and they wouldn't return for 3 months. So the grass would have time to rest. Due to that, it regrows stronger and it stores a lot of carbon in the soil. Savory Institute is, for example, doing a lot of work with that. So we helped the farmer with establishing that grazing plan, and we also started incorporating trees into it, which are then again storing carbon in the soil, producing fruits for the farmer, and producing shade for the cows in the south. So in southern Portugal, this was practices which will make a lot of sense. Now, if you're in the desert or if you're in a different area, then it might not make sense. So what that transition looks like is always context specific. But it's generally always a way of trying to see how nature works in that area and then essentially replicating nature's processes.
Thank you. Another question? Someone? Yeah.
Thank you. Your operation is very... sorry. What I want to say is that it sounds that there's a lot of things in common also in Israel and Europe, especially in the Mediterranean countries, and I wonder if there is some group of specifically a group of farmers or WhatsApp group or whatever that is doing Mediterranean farming. I think there's a lot of issues in common, especially dealing with water and problems in a long dry summer. And another question about if you're supporting new farmers, not transition from conventional to regular farmers that want to start anew.
Yeah, both really good questions. On the first one, I mean, we do work with farmers in the Mediterranean area. We do have Spanish and Portuguese groups, but they are also happening to be in Spanish and Portugal mostly. But I can highly recommend, somewhere in this room Sheila is sitting, and she's doing amazing work in scaling regenerative agriculture in Greece, and that would probably be a very good contact point to be connecting with. And on the second question, it touches a very important issue that we're seeing, which is not part in here, which is access to land. Right? This is a major issue in the European Union. In the Netherlands, for example, 1 hectare of farmland costs 80,000 euros, which is about 300,000 shekels. So it's almost impossible for farmers to start large-scale farms. And for us, it is, of course, more interesting to work with large-scale farms because the effort of the generation of the transition plan and the measuring and everything is the same per farm. So the bigger the farm, the bigger the impact is, because at the moment we don't have the capacity yet to work with all of the farmers that we would like to work with. So the community is open to anybody, and any farmer of any size can join it. And we have a lot of market gardeners, for example, in there, which is happening due to the regenerative agriculture, let's say, hype in the last 3 years. One beautiful thing that we're seeing is a lot of young people that are realizing, hey, this office life is also not really working for me, and I think the pandemic also helped, and they want to get into regenerative agriculture. But all that they can do or afford is getting 1 hectare or 2 hectares. And with that, you can perfectly set up a market garden, you can maybe get something between 50 and 100,000 euros of income and supplying a few hundred families in a city with vegetables, which is great. And I think it's amazing that that movement is happening. But in the end, let's face it, most of us are living off the 4 main crops, and for that you need several hundred hectares of land. So what we are really focusing on is supporting those large-scale farmers in Europe with their transition, and then as part of that, hopefully we will also be able to, at some point, get something that government is supporting land for farmers that want to start up. But it's definitely a big issue that we're seeing, that it's almost only children of farmers that are able to take over these large-scale farms. And that's a specific group that we're targeting because, yeah, access to land is a very big issue for newly starting farmers.
I have one small question. The farmers that come to you, except for the market gardeners and small scale, what kind of farmers are there typically? Are they in some kind of need because they're farmers and producing well, or what? Yeah.
It's very varied. So we work with farmers in 16 different European Union countries. The one demographic that we see throughout everything is age. So it's almost always people between 35 and 45. And very often it is actually the children of farmers who decided very early on, I don't want to take over the farm of my parents. This looks like a horrible life. I don't want to do that. Then they went into the city, they studied, they started an office job, they realized this is also not making me happy. And then luckily on the internet, they maybe watched Kiss the Ground, or they found some other way that got them to regenerative agriculture. And then they go back to their parents and they're like, okay, I take over the farm, but only if you let me do it my way. And then they often get in contact with us and they're like, hey, I want to do this regenerative agriculture thing, but I only know I should keep the soil covered and I should always keep a living root in the soil, but I don't really know what to do. And this is exactly where we can take them on the hand and we can help them to figure out how the transition could be working in their specific context.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Amazing